We're on sections number 177, Jesus presents Mary to John, and 178, 3 hours of darkness. And we're coming closer to the end of our study. We're looking at question 976, and this, of course, is a special question here. Why did Jesus send Mary to be with John? And this is going to be based on John chapter 19, verses 26 to 27, which says, "When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciples standing by whom he loved, he saith unto his mother, Woman, behold thy son. Then saith he to the disciple, Behold thy mother. And from that hour that disciple took her unto his own home." And so the answer that we got is B, he wanted her to have a home with him. And that's the clearest statement in there, but then of course people take this concept here and they put all kinds of extra interpretation and speculation to go with it. This is one of the difficulties that you get when you're doing Bible interpretation, is people see things and we come with our filters on, and with the filters of our old notions, something that we heard somewhere or a teaching that we got from somewhere, and then people make assumptions based on that, and that's always a problem. Now, when we get to doing the study of the book of the Revelation coming up in the fall here, this is going to be a problem all over the place. I was talking to a friend of mine, my old dormitory supervisor, who does a lot of specialty preaching on prophecy, and I was just chatting with him this morning, and I was trying to get some insights on some extra things, and one of the things that we both referred to was that a common answer that we're going to have for a lot of questions when we go to study the Revelation is, I don't know. There are so many things that we can get some ideas about, but prophecy, of course, is always easier to understand after it's been fulfilled. Okay, in prospect, looking forward, it's always a little bit more difficult. And there are just some things we're just not going to know. I was reading, for instance, in the one section dealing with 7 thunders, and John is just told explicitly, don't write down what you heard. So it's like you get to see something that it was said, and we're told deliberately you're not allowed to even tell people what these things mean. And so when you go to scriptures, you got to be careful, especially some of the ones where there's a lot of symbols involved. You got to be careful how you apply them. And so that's going to be the case here, especially as we come to Mary, because when you look at option A, where it says he wanted her to be his mother, since she is the mother of the church. Okay, now we wanted to make sure that we didn't just leave something that was a little unclear, nebulous. We threw in both of those ideas here to be clear on what we were trying to get at. What we're trying to get at by that false answer A is the Roman Catholic Church distortion that they make about the significance of Mary. Okay, as you look at the scriptures, we've seen this before in the Gospels and a lot of the passages, on the times that Jesus did deal with Mary, he did so with mild rebuke. Okay, there's no reason to suggest in that context of how he dealt with her before. There's nothing indicated that she had a special elevated position above everybody. So why interpret it that way now? He's not now elevating her status over all of Christianity, and that's one of the things that people will naturally do with that. They'll take their ideas that they got from a teaching in Roman Catholicism and suggest that she is somehow the mother of the church. She is not. He was merely providing for her and doing so with a Christian setting. And it's not that he wanted John to have someone to take care of him, okay, because then this would go to the idea of Mary being over the church in some way. No, at this point, Jesus' brothers were not yet believers. Now they're going to be, they're going to be believing in him, but at this point they're not. So John would be the apostle that he was closest to. This is the one whom Jesus loved, and so he just had him to be able to take care of her. So C, he wanted John to have someone to take care of him. It was customary for women to be cared for. And so since she was not being elevated to some mythic status, the normal practice of care was being provided for. Okay, any questions or comments before I move on from that particular question? From that section. Okay. Section 178, the 3 darkest hours of all eternity, of all history. So we come to question 977. What was an indication that God had forsaken Jesus? And this is based on Matthew 27, verses 45 to 46. It says, now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land unto the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani? That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Okay, so what's the indication that God had forsaken Jesus? It is A, there was darkness over the earth. Now, when you look at B, there was terrible lightning and thundering. Well, on other occasions, God's interactions with man were accompanied by thunder and lightning, such as Exodus chapter 19 in the giving of the law. Exodus 19, verses 14 to 16 says, and Moses went down from the mount unto the people and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. And he said unto the people, be ready against the 3rd day, come not at your wives. And it came to pass on the 3rd day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mountain, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. Okay, so this is something that happened at other times, but just not here. Okay, so for the correct answer A, the darkness might suggest to us that the interaction was not with man so much as it was with Jesus on the cross. The darkness speaks of the silence and the absence of God that spoke of Jesus being forsaken by his Father. We might not be able to adequately understand and speculate on Christ was exactly speaking of in being forsaken. This is one of those things about the Trinity we don't really quite get to understand. We know that the Father, the Son, and the Spirit are all one together. They are perfectly blended together, coexistent. But somehow we know that the rift in the relationship in the Trinity is probably the ultimate experience of suffering for our sin. And I often point out, especially when I'm sharing the gospel with somebody, that yes, what Christ suffered on the cross with the crucifixion and the beatings that went beforehand were excruciating, but nothing compared to something that we are just entirely shut out of, and that is the experience of between the Father and the Son, and that sense of being forsaken. If somebody says, well, gee, I don't know, how can you explain that? This seems like impossible. I said, yep, it's impossible, yet it was. And I can't explain it, but I can perceive, just logically, this has to be the ultimate forsaken feeling that there could be. It's at that point that Jesus is going through the greatest suffering that we are going to not see. For C, Jesus was yelling and screaming. Is that the indication? No, he suffered it silently. Now, if people knew what was happening at that moment, they would have been doing worse than running and screaming in terror if they knew what was happening. There's going to be a time when people will be more in touch with the reality of the terror when the tribulation comes upon them. I'm thinking specifically of Revelation 6, verses 15 to 17. It says, and the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be saved? And so if there was anybody who should have been yelling and screaming, it would have been them. I mean, when they get to this time in the great wrath and the tribulation time, well, then they'll know to yell and scream. Okay. Okay, question 978. Yes, sir.
I just want to read John 1, verse 9, verse 9, referring to Jesus. That was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. Jesus is the light, and because he's about to give up the ghost, therefore that would bring in darkness to the world. Would that be correct?
I'm sorry. Therefore, what?
Therefore, it would bring, because he's the light. It says here in John 1, verse 9, that he was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. And because he is going to give up the ghost, therefore there would naturally be darkness, because he's the one that lightens the world, gives light to a dark world.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair association there. Yeah, Jesus as the light of the world, and if the darkness has come upon him, then it's most fitting that there would be this darkness for those 3 hours. Amen. Amen. Okay.
One thing about that too, for a second.
Yes.
It dawned on me when you said before excruciating. Our word excruciate, doesn't that come from the original root for crucifixion?
That would be. I'm going to make a note of that.
Because when our pastor was doing a series on that, I believe, if I remember right, it was years ago. He was saying excruciate comes from crucifixion somehow, whatever the root is. So that when we say excruciating, we still have no idea what that really feels like.
Yes, yeah. Even if we say excruciating, we're not quite worthy to be able to say that.
No.
We'll check that out. That is good. Okay. Okay, then, the next section here, 978. The next question, 978. You read Psalm 22, verses 1 to 8, 12 to 13, and Malachi chapter 4, verse 5. And we ask the question, how did the Jews respond to Jesus crying out over the Father forsaking him? So we're going to read all of those scriptures then. Psalm 22, verses 1 to 8 and 12 to 13 says, a psalm of David, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me, and from the words of my roaring? O my God, I cry in the daytime, but thou hearest not, and in the night season, and am not silent. But thou art holy, O thou that inhabitest the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in thee, they trusted, and thou didst deliver them. They cried unto thee, and were delivered. They trusted in thee, and were not confounded. But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men, and despised of the people. All they that see me laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip, they shake the head, saying, He trusted on the Lord that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him, seeing he delighted in him. Many bulls have compassed me. Strong bulls of Bashan have beset me round. They gaped upon me with their mouths, and as a roaring lion. And then Mark 15, verse 34 and 30 to 36 says, At the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is, being interpreted, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And some of them that stood by, when they heard it, said, Behold, he calleth Elias. And one ran and filled a sponge full of vinegar and put it on a reed and gave him to drink, saying, Let alone, let us see whether Elias will come to take him down. Okay, so the answer that we got was A, they confused him with calling on Elijah, who was supposed to come to present the Messiah. Now, Malachi 4:5 says, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord." Of course, they missed entirely what was happening because they were familiar with that passage from Malachi 4:5. And even though they were misapplying it here, they were saying, oh yeah, okay, according to Malachi 4:5, Elijah's supposed to come. I mean, they were taking Christ calling out for God, saying Eloi. He was calling out for God, not for Elijah. And they're misinterpreting this, and they're very aware of the Malachi 4 passage. This demonstrates that they should have been held accountable since they knew the scriptures. So this goes back to everything that they had known from before. So they are demonstrating their knowledge of Messianic scriptures. For C, they got saved when they realized that Jesus was taking on the infinite wrath of God on himself? Yeah, no, they didn't. Okay, they preferred to try to mess around with the Elijah passage. And so B, Psalm 22:1 is what Jesus quoted as a fulfillment of what happened at the cross. There was no way that he had control on the reaction of the people to encompass him, and they were certainly missing the application of Psalm 22 to the situation. So they were taking Malachi and applying that. Well, they knew the Psalm 22 passages as well. Why didn't they apply that instead? Okay, so this demonstrates their knowledge. They are definitely guilty. And again, we want to point out why Psalm 22 is so valuable to us is because there are so many scriptures and prophecies that are being fulfilled in that single psalm. Probably, maybe God had all of those concentrated in one section, along with like Isaiah chapter 53, in order to have people not miss it, but to get the most important thing in the universe. And that's the thing that, to me, is the most greatly used to be able to demonstrate confidence in Jesus Christ, confidence in God, and confidence in the Bible. Okay, so question 979. Read Psalm 22, verses 14 to 15. Yes, Brother Tom first, yes.
I believe 977. 978. Jesus himself, when he was preaching to them, even at the synagogue, he was explaining about his role as the Messiah, first time, which is to be distinguished from his role after the tribulation. In Isaiah 6, he read before the synagogue the first two verses of Isaiah 61, which says, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." And then he closed the book. He did not continue to read the next portion, which is, "And the day of vengeance of our God to comfort all that mourn." That's the second coming.
Yeah, okay,
so,
yes.
So, when they were asking about Elijah coming before him, he said he has already come in the person of John the Baptist in the spirit of Elijah. So they were not listening.
Right, exactly. Yes. Okay. Yeah, just goes to everything. I mean, how often they didn't listen, which happens with a lot of people. They don't listen to what's really being said. Yeah, yes. Question 979. Okay, as you read Psalm 22, verses 14 to 15, why did they give Jesus vinegar to drink? Okay, Psalm 22, verses 14 to 15 says, "I am poured out like water, all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax that is melted in the midst of my bowels. My strength is dried up like a potsherd. A potsherd is a broken piece of pottery that's left out and thrown on a heap, and it's just dried out clay. My tongue cleaveth to my jaws, and thou hast brought me into the dust of death. And then you read John 19, verses 28 to 29. It says, after this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, saith, I thirst. Now there was set a vessel full of vinegar, and they filled a sponge with vinegar, and put it upon hyssop, and put it to his mouth. And so why did they give Jesus vinegar to drink? It is C, because he was evidently dehydrated. Okay, looking at A and B, because they read the prophecy in Psalm 22 and wanted to fulfill it. Again, this is a reminder. This is a reminder that there's no way Jesus could have orchestrated these things to make them happen. So it emphasizes the responsibility of the people, because there was such an abundance of prophecy for them to see being fulfilled before their eyes. Okay, again, one of the strengths of prophecy is to see it fulfilled in retrospect. And so, for example, in our day, there are things that are happening in the world that certainly look like the day of the Lord is coming quickly. When that day happens, we'll be able to look back on it and say that, of course, we should have seen the signs. Okay, however, the prophecies of Psalm 22 should have been just as much in their view as Malachi 4:5 had been. When you look at B, because they repented of the evil that they had done, okay, their offering a drug concoction was not a sign of their guilt as much as it might have been a consideration given to a dying man. And this might suggest that they had some possible sense of remorse at least. And that was from the vinegar actually that had been offered earlier with the drugged vinegar. So C, because he was evidently dehydrated. By rejecting vinegar earlier, and that was Matthew 27:34, Jesus had remained clear-headed to have been able to completely experience the torch of the cross for our sake. This would have enabled him to be able to finally cry out, okay, this drinking of the vinegar would have enabled him to be to finally cry out now that the sacrifice was finished. And so Matthew 27:50 is going to say, Jesus, when he cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. Now that's of course coming into the next section, that particular aspect about yielding up the ghost. But this is one of those things where when you examine the torches of the cross, the ability to even speak from being so dehydrated would have been difficult. And so that vinegar would have given him an ability to actually finally get to say something. Okay, I'm going to see if I have. Okay. Okay, that is that section for tonight. Any other comments? Anybody has any questions? Miss Nancy?
Yeah, I looked up excruciating,
Okay.
and it does come from that. It says to torture, torment, inflict very severe pain on, as if by crucifying. This is from the 1560s, Latin excruciatus, pain, past participle of excruciare, to torture, torment, rack, plague, figuratively to afflict, harass, vex, torment, from out from, thoroughly, and then it has a bunch of other combinations of words. But yeah, we get it from the crucifixion.
There you go.
So we have no business saying we had an excruciating headache or whatever.
Yeah.
We have no idea what we're talking about. I do have one question for you.
Yes, sir.
So when we were talking about the darkness was over the earth in the first question there.
Yes.
So was it a cloud, or is it also possible the sun itself was darkened like it describes in Revelation?
Okay.
Or could that sun darkening in Revelation only be reserved for that event?
It could have been a cloud, highly unlikely. This is an act of
Right.
God. It could have
Right.
been a darkening of the sun. I would say that is highly unlikely also. I think this is just God having a darkness upon the earth. I remember somewhere in the past it being preached somewhere. I think to the point that it doesn't say anything about the sun being covered or the sun having less light. I think I would like to go along with the suggestion that the darkness is a spiritual darkness, that the darkness is something that is a sucking away of light, not so much a covering of light. And I think I would want to go somewhere in that direction, mostly because we know what's happening. Okay, knowing that it's the fact that Christ is being forsaken of the Father, and that is associated with that darkness, I want to suggest that somehow that's directly connected. Miss Wilma.
To the darkness that Moses, that God put over Egypt when Moses gave the curse. One of the
Now that's a good question too. Would it be similar?
because that was so thick.
Yeah.
They said it was a thick darkness.
Yeah, a
So-
thick darkness with Moses in
Yeah.
Egypt. Yeah, I'm going to call it somehow a little bit different from that, but I think that, yeah, that doesn't sound like a darkening of the sun either.
Right.
That sounds like it would be just darkness in that sense. But this darkness would have to somehow be a little bit qualitatively different because it's associated with the lack of sin. But yeah, not necessarily a covering of the sun. Brother Tone.
In the Genesis account, God created light. Therefore, what's to prevent him from withdrawing light
Right.
entirely? Yeah.
What is to prevent him from withdrawing light? Yeah. Yeah.